Okay, Australian Veteran News viewers, I'm very pleased this morning to be welcoming the Minister for Veterans in Victoria, Shaun Leane. Shaun, welcome to Australian Veteran News, and I should say welcome back.
Oh, thanks for having me again, Mark. It's always a pleasure.
So there's a few things that we wanted to put to you today, or discuss with you today. First of all, we would like to ask you about the update on the Veterans Employment Program, and then perhaps you could tell us about the work that the state government's doing in collating submissions for the Royal Commission into veteran suicide prevention. But before we did that, I thought it might be good to start off with your reflections on how ANZAC Day went this year, and perhaps anything that you might, any changes you think might need to be done for future years.
Look, at ANZAC Day, I think we came from a situation where it was announced that there may not be a march or a dawn service or any dawn service across the state, Mark. I was really pleased that we got to the point that there was 300 events across the state, different RSL sub-branches, and also there obviously was a march in the CBD and a dawn service. So, and look, the bottom line is, whether it was the RSL or whoever's organising an event, I actually admire that organisations are putting their members' health first. I think this is what the RSL and the Shrine had to do. And look, there was a bit of frustration and anger around some of the way that the events were put on. I've got to say, Mark, in Canberra, where the Prime Minister was, that was a limited number event, that dawn service. That had crowd control to limit the numbers. In Adelaide, there was a dawn service which was actually limited numbers and fenced off. And then in the afternoon, Port Adelaide played St Kilda, I think, or that evening. And there was, I don't know the crowd size, but there was a big crowd size. So there was a bit of, anger around the size of the crowd of the MCG and so forth. But what happened in Melbourne was very typical of what happened in a lot of capital cities and other cities. So it just goes back to, I'm the same as everyone. I wish there wasn't a global pandemic. And we all do. I wish we were all vaccinated by ANZAC Day. We weren't. These are the realities we live with. So, I think, and the thing that I actually find quite annoying in particular is, what the Shrine Trust and the RSL had to put in COVID safe plans like any other public event. They were the ones that determined the numbers that they feel they could do a safe event. They were the ones who put in the numbers, not the state government. No one would dictate it to them. In fact, I was with an event not long after it was out publicly there may not be any dawn service or march. I was at an event with the RSL president, and I had a conversation with him one-on-one, and I said to him, look, the CEO of RSL Victoria has my mobile, and you blokes ring me, anything you need, we'll make sure you get it. We agreed to extra funding, we agreed to anything they needed, but it was their application on the premise of what they thought would be, what they could control, an event that prioritised the health of their members. So, and what annoys me is, I was actually at the Shrine yesterday around an announcement for funding for improvements at the Shrine, and I was told that, and the Shrine has volunteers that do great work. There's a lot of volunteers there, and a lot of them are actually ex-servicemen and women. But, they have volunteers there, and the abuse those volunteers by answering the phone at the Shrine in days after was just completely unacceptable, and people that were uneducated in a process that, as I said, these bodies put their members and they put, containing a global virus first. So I think there'll be people who still debate it. That's my position, Mark. There'll be people who debate it. There's all the outrage and all that. But the simple matter is It was very similar to what happened in other capital cities. The other capital cities didn't get the headlines that Victoria got, but that, and that, I'm not whinging about that, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Shaun, is the cooperation between the organisers and the state government was there, and they had a direct line to you.
Oh, absolutely. And look, it's I'm not being critical either of the organisations coming out early and their concerns whether they could even put an event on. It's a global pandemic, and and so the events went ahead. They were running in a COVID-safe manner. There was angst about the numbers in the March. I think the RSL applied for over 5,000. They increased it to 8,000. They ended up with something like 4,000 to 5,000 marching anyway. So I reckon their original bid was pretty close to what they thought would come. There was 300 events across the state, and those events actually reported increased numbers, some of them, which is fantastic. And they ran it in a COVID-safe manner.
It certainly had an impact on regional events, I understand, and quite a bit more effort went into some of those local communities doing their local, cenotaphs and so forth.
Yeah, I actually physically went to a few afterwards, and spoke to some RSLs, and they're absolutely delighted, actually. So, and I mean, there was some that didn't go ahead as well regionally, which is a real shame. But I understand that too. It's a challenging time for everyone. Let's hope next ANZAC Day we don't even have to take any of this stuff too much into consideration. And 2 years ago there was no public events. Unfortunately, the people, the ex-servicemen and women in Perth and Peel, completely missed out because of an unfortunate small outbreak. But that's the. So look, it's good that in saying this, Mark, it's good that passions came out, and my goal is to try and corral those passions into areas that really matter to veterans and their family members, and that's probably a good segue to the terms of reference.
It's an excellent segue, Shaun, because one of these things is we can spend a lot of energy worrying about the ANZAC Day March, but there's more immediate and more important things to veterans and their families, and one of those things that's high on the agenda, along with housing and other issues, is employment. It's the key to a lot of things, and on our last program, you mentioned that you wanted to make Victoria a destination state for veterans and their families. So that was a few months ago now. I'm hoping you might be able to give us an update on what's happened since then.
Yeah, and look, I mean, it's a lofty aspiration, and we're also competing against warmer climates of other states, and I appreciate that. We've got the group that I asked to come together and volunteer their time, which I really appreciate. I'm meeting, I think, the week after next. I've tasked them. Look, I had a great conversation with a peak employer body only this week around what we're doing, and they're actually quite keen to assist, and they actually think it makes a lot of sense. So I think I mentioned last time, Mark, someone like me who, like yourself and your friends that really understand the forces, you really have to keep it simple when you're explaining things. So what I've tasked them to do is, if we have, say, a 8 to 10 page plain English, really easy to read document that we can leave with employers and employer groups that explain, there's some probably easy areas where you explain that the qualities around the punctuality, when being asked to do something, they'll do it, working great with the team. Yep. All of that's probably easy. Where it's a little bit harder to sort of make it easier to understand is the different skills that ex-members have, as a different variety of skills. There's experts in all sorts of areas, and I think it was Major General McLaughlin explained to me, the forces are set up, you can build a town in 3 months with the people that are there. So it's not just about building, but there's also health, there's, logistics, there's, there's so many skills. And so I kind of want to have a bit of a translation into understanding all those skills And then once we've got this, because it's always good when you have a meeting to leave something and something that's easy to understand for someone to follow up on, and maybe some contacts. So once we've got this document, hopefully by the next few months, we'll engage, and it won't necessarily have to be me, but I'm keen to do it as well. But we might get Shaun, who's the CEO of Legacy. She's leading this group. She might go out to employer groups. We might get ex-service men and women that obviously have more expertise than myself, going out and speaking to these different employer groups and employers in the private sector. We've still got the public sector employment program going on. We're about 600 plus at the moment, and the aspiration is to get to about 1,000 in coming years. So that's been a good process. But the more I speak to, as I said, I had a great conversation with a peak employer body only this week, and it just makes sense. But I think the thing is that we just have to go out and do a bit of an education program, and I think it'll work.
So as a public sector, in the public sector, Shaun, as a significant employer, and you're talking about numbers there, I think 600, I think you mentioned, the facilitating the transition into public sector employment, if veterans wanted to do that, or their family members wanted to do that, what are the sort of things that actually assist them in not only just translating their skills across, but have you made any changes in selection process, for example, that it puts more emphasis on things such as teamwork and those qualities that are hard to sort of tick a box against when you do a selection interview for an employee? Yeah,
absolutely. And a group of ex-servicemen spoke to me the other day about this, and they actually want me to revisit, how we go about it and who we target. So you're probably making the same point as you. And also how we advertise it. So we've in the budget, the Victorian Veterans Commission, there's some money in there. I think we spoke about before about a potential ESO, or it doesn't have to be ESOs, but a potential summit around people from the community, and we've got money for that for late next year. But we've also got money. I really want to beef up the BVC's website, so it becomes a sort of a point where people can go to get all sorts of information around the program we just spoke about. Information. Look, I had a really good conversation with the previous president of the Victorian Farmers Federation, and he was talking to me about, he's got a really great interest in veterans, and he was saying to me, a few months ago, there's probably some great position in agriculture that they could probably advertise, but both of us were kind of thinking, where do we start? Where do we start with that? So I want to beef up this website so it can be a central point, but I am seriously considering other avenues about just things, getting back to what you were saying before, to make sure that Victorian veterans and their families are getting the information about things they actually care about.
So one of the things with employment, and I'll focus on public sector because it's got a very strict system of selection criteria and so forth when people apply for a job, and that selection criteria process can be a major hurdle for a lot of people, in particular veterans who are fresh out of the ADF who aren't familiar with that type of program. And I'm aware that other states have arranged for veterans actually already working in the public sector to volunteer as mentors for those who want it and that sort of thing. And I'd imagine something like that would help people over that hurdle.
Absolutely. And mentioned David McLaughlin before. He is leading this program and has for a few years. So, and he actually is facilitating exactly what you're talking about. And in saying, this is targeting ex-servicemen and women, this particular program, but there'd be hundreds, if not thousands, of ex-servicemen and women working in the public service that are autonomous to this project. They're there.
Yeah.
And it's a really good point you make about, and I've met a few in my travels, they're there. And it's a really good point you make, Mark, about just making it easier and more accessible for everyone to understand that may be interested. And it's a point that's been made to me in conversations. I've had a lot of conversations in recent weeks, and some great conversations, because of the terms of reference cut-off date coming today. But I had a few guys come in for a 45-minute conversation and ended up 2.5 hours, and I put some meetings back, and had another half an hour meeting that went for 90 minutes only the other day, because I really like everything's on the table as far as I'm concerned, particularly what we do at a state level, and market's limited. We've had this conversation before around the onus is on the federal government around welfare and a lot of other areas, but I think as a state government we can do a lot more in the employment area, and also I've had some really good conversations about maybe we can do more promoting just some wellness programs that have really worked, not welfare but wellness programs that have really been good in some of the cases where speaking to ex-servicemen and women that have isolated themselves from the society for a period of time, and what are the circuit breakers? And some of them are they're not. Some of them aren't obvious, I think, but but they're really, really good. And so I've formed a great interest in this area, and with and it's not like when I mention mental health, it's not. I mean, we all have everyone has areas that keeps them well with their mental health. So it's not being a stigmatised thing, but I've had a really good conversation with James Molino, the Minister for Mental Health, and also Daniel Andrews before he had to go off on sick leave for a while, has asked me and James to do some work, and which with the as you would have noticed, the state budget had quite a bit of money for to implement the recommendations. Some of the recommendations, like the recommendations, will take a few years to fulfil, but just on work with James around the veterans and family members around that sort of wellness area. And so I'm really keen to do that, and had a great conversation with James.
One of the areas, I'll just give a plug to an event that we're running at ABU, is the Veterans of Bentley initiative, and we're trialling piloting with partnership with Bentley RSL and Defence Bank are supporting us, and Australian Veterans Arts Museum. We're trying to find ways to go local, and it's the connection is probably the first thing that needs to happen. And so we're very focused on the connection side of things. And I guess one of the things that I'd like to know is, how do you get these programs, talk about mental wellness and those sorts of things, how do you get them out of, being CBD centric or online centric to local communities?
No, it's a really good point. So I'm and with the Minister for Mental Health, the conversation I had with him is, I'll go and do some work, and I've asked the department and my advisors to collate what is been pretty much proven of these areas that are currently working. So let's go and find, I went, and can I give a rap to Warrnambool RSL that, they started a veterans centre, off their own back about 6 years ago, I believe, or it might have been a bit shorter. But I spoke to the outgoing president and told me he was a Vietnam vet, and he felt that when he left the forces after, obviously the Vietnam conflict, he just felt completely lost and didn't feel that he had support around him, and he vowed if he had a chance he would change that. So when he became president of Warrnambool, he actually did change that, and they used finances to build this centre. It's just like, I was just so impressed. And then, you go to Ballarat, and there's a group of vets that aren't even tied with the RSL have started a veterans wellbeing centre, got a property off the local council, doing some great work. And speaking about circuit breakers, I met a young vet there that explained to me he did isolate himself, felt in a dark place in himself, and formed an interest in beekeeping and got his own hive, and then he had to, like, he had the passion. He wanted to speak to other people that had the same passionate habit as him. But we're actually really glad that, you know, recently in one of the grants program, he's involved with an association down there. So it's not just him. There's an association that, you know, of that does this sort of hobby, but he's got some funding with that association to go and, you know, across the state. And if there's any vets and family members that, you know, have an interest in this, is, you know, getting back to, it makes him feel happy. It makes him feel well. It's got him back into society.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think this is an area, like, getting back to welfare is the federal government's area, and so it should be. You know, their budget's $11.5 billion. You know, the vets budget in state isn't anywhere near that. But working with other portfolios, like in mental health, working with housing, like with Basic Care and Carry On, have had some really good meetings with Homes Victoria with the large amount of money that was announced for housing. And we're working through, you know, there's a few things as far as some regulations and that they need to do some work to adhere to, but we're helping them do that because they're so important.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think you're highlighting the fact that there's an enormous amount of resources out there all over the state. It's a matter of coordinating some of that and finding those connections for people.
Yeah, and I think you know, look, I don't look in. There's groups that are doing this great work. They're not saying they're actually, you know, doing professional mental health work or welfare work. They're not saying that. They're just started some really good things that have helped people, and they're inviting other people if they feel that it'll assist them in just being, like I said, being well, being happy, being occupied. You know, like we all strive to have.
Yeah. Okay, Shaun, thank you for that. I guess the final thing that I was hoping you'd give us an update on is your coordination of the submissions for the terms of reference for the Royal Commission. Now, as you mentioned, the deadline for that closes today. How's that process been going, and what are some of your reflections or observations on that in a general sense?
Yeah. Oh, Mark, I think I hope I said last time I was on with you, what an absolute privilege it is for me to be in this position, to have this role. You know, I've got to say, the more I get to speak to veterans and the families, the more I realise what I don't know. Like this, you know, and I never will know, and I never will appreciate it. I never will appreciate the experience and understand the experience that people have had to experience, because I haven't experienced it. And that's, you know, and I think that's an important thing for anyone in a position like me and my staff and the department to, you know, acknowledge every day. And so in the consultation, Minister Chester wrote to me and other state veterans ministers and others to basically was tasking me to engage with the Victorian veteran community around the terms of reference. And what's been a privilege to me is I've had a number of first-hand conversations. I also created a new email address so people could just directly send any submissions or ideas that they had to that email address, and we've had a bit of traffic there. And also, I've had some submissions from different groups and individuals sent to me directly, not to that email, to me directly. Collated a lot of that, and as you can imagine, Mark, there's some pretty common themes. You know yourself. There's some pretty common themes. Collated that I got two women that lost their partners, and I got two veterans, that one that does a lot of he's a very good DVA advocate, and another veteran that's that actually knows a lot of people. And so four of them and me sat down in a Teams meeting on Wednesday. I read to them. We put up the screen the draft response that I have for Minister Chester, and the four of them changed and edited some of it, and we've picked up those edits. So what we've done is I'm sending Minister Chester a letter soon after that we talked today about what it's Victorian veterans and their families' view, not mine. It's their words, and we've got it from the submissions, and we've got it double checked by some really smart people in the veterans family, and so I can give you a scoop, Mark, before I even send the letter.
Yeah.
So I think you won't be surprised with number one, and look, they're not in any priority order, but this is what it's numbered, and there's 14 different areas. And this, what I say in the letter is these 14 themes are only indicative. They're not limited. So if other submission goes in that doesn't cover these themes, it shouldn't be used against anyone in Victoria. And so I stress that. So and I'll read from. I might still play with some words, but I'll read with the Victorian. This is number one. Victorian veterans and their families believe it's absolutely critical for the Commission to hear specific evidence on Department of Veterans Affairs welfare system. Victorian veterans and families have almost universally pointed out the difficulty of navigating department's processes, and this causes a enormous and unnecessary stress on veterans and their families. Victorian veterans and their families continually point to the claims process, which they say is unnecessary, onerous, drawn out, in brackets sometimes or over decades, and overly complicated. This includes any legislation and acts that DVA must work under, and how they can be consolidated and encompassed into best practice entitlements of each act into one act. Simply put, you shouldn't need skilled advocates to get your entitlements. And there's a quote, and I've added quotes in this letter, and there's a quote from a vet that says, it's well known among veteran community that the Australian Defence Force and DVA will make access to entitlements extremely difficult, straight, near impossible, particularly for a veteran who has already been subjected to so much and does not have the stamina to continue fighting for their rights. Now, as I said, Mark, you won't be surprised that's probably there. And forgive my Year 10 Oakley Tech reading, but that's their words, not mine. Yeah. So, and I'll just touch on the other themes, Mark. The number two is, and I think this is really important. This is really important. I'm really glad that this was pointed out to me by a couple of people in their submissions and their conversations, is that Victorian veterans and their family, as all of us are aware, there is some skepticism about from the community about basically, there's been other inquiries, there's been other reviews where the recommendations haven't been followed up or implemented. So what Victorian veterans and their families are calling on the Commonwealth is to do as the Victorian government did with the Royal Commission into Mental Health System and commit to implement all the Commission's recommendations prior to the hearing starting. This will also engender good faith participation by our veterans and their support networks. So I think this is critical, Mark, because why put yourself through why be a witness and open up your soul? And some of these stories, like I've read some, seriously, some of these submissions that I've had, to the point that I asked the Secretary of the Department to make sure there's some pastoral care for the departmental people who've been reading, and my advisors. So it's just like, and so why would, particularly, family members and veterans that, why would you get in the witness box and put yourself through it if you weren't confident something was going to come out of it?
It's a really important point, Shaun, and we've written about this, the process and the way it looks in terms of who's in charge and so forth in the federal government. But I also wonder and worry that the submissions that you didn't receive or the submissions that haven't been put because people just can't do it, and they're the ones that are probably the most crucial. And yes, we go through a big public process, and we can be put direct, through various channels to make the submission. But consider, for a moment, some of those ones that you've read, and some of them are probably quite harrowing, I'd imagine. Imagine some of those ones that are even worse than that. Couldn't even bring themselves to write about it. It's just too desperate and too sad.
And I think, Mark, I'm a Johnny come lately, I've been doing, I can't say I'm new because I've been in the role for a while, but, if the general populace actually knew the way some of our systems treat veterans and their families, they'd be absolutely outraged. I just think it's not there, and I think the Royal Commission, let's hope that all the mainstream media, and your media, of course, follows, the evidence and puts it out there, because that's what needs to happen. I think that's going to be one of the real pivotal things about this Royal Commission. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. And in fairness to the current federal government, in the letter that I'm writing to Minister Chester, I'm saying it's like there's been all sorts of flavours of government for 100 years. This has been broken for 100 years. No one's had a crack at it. So I really welcome the announcement of the Royal Commission. 100%. Yes. But I do understand the nervousness around veterans and their family members and the community as a whole. The nervousness around, well, if it's going to happen, let it be fair income. There shouldn't be any limitations. So we go through. I've got some other, recruiting processes. And these are coming from vets, not me. Scope to consider previous inquiries, coronial reports, coronial investigations reports, and those findings. There's also, this is really important too. This came through some submissions about scope to consider suicide of immediate family members of veterans. So I think that should be considered. The unreasonable onus placed on non-government organisations such as ESOs, as far as supporting the welfare system. There's it's unreasonable. It's it's just happened over the 100 years probably, and it just seems to be unreasonable expectation where some of these, there's some great ESOs as but some of these ESOs, there's 3,500 in Australia apparently, and some of them just probably unequipped to support some people at a time when they really need support. So if you go down into the wrong door, it's not going to help.
And of course, ESOs are mostly staffed by volunteers. You go on the wrong door on the wrong day, that colours your experience forever. And, you hear stories of veterans or family members who approached an ex-service organisation, 15, 20 years ago, had a very bad experience and decided never to go back.
I'm keen to.
That kind of thing. And that's pretty sad because there's a lot out there, and a lot of the ex-service organisations are very keen to help and do the right thing. So.
They do fantastic work. And like I was saying before, Mark, some of the groups don't pretend to be anything but, they're just to help people feeling well and healthy, and just, like interest clubs or, as you mentioned, the art before. They're fantastic. They're absolutely fantastic. But they don't pretend to be anything that anything other than they are. And look, I'm pretty keen to. I'm going to set up a meeting with the Minister for Consumer Affairs, Melissa Horn, in coming weeks to initiate discussions about what we can do in Victoria and relook at how Consumer Affairs registers ESOs, because there is a national accreditation as well. But what we can do in our state, because I just think it's another area. It's probably the next area. I think the Department of Vets in Victoria probably every time I come and speak to a group of vets, I come back with more work for them. But this is, but that's what they're there for, and they've embraced it. So that's another area. Look, there's the culture within the ADF. When you spoke about submissions, I've got a quote in here from female vet about the way she was treated while she was there, and she sent me a whole submission along with a group of submissions from a one organised by some vets in regional Victoria, and it's just really sad. So I'm putting the quote in, and she's happy for me to put in, but it's just, it's not. No wonder people, like, not everyone gets treated like this. And some of the guys I spoke to, men and women, that have left the forces, say it was the best job they ever had. They're not. Best job they ever had. Loved it. And they just worry about their friends and their, people that come behind them around these areas. So it's not like running down the role or anything like that. It's just things need to be tidied up. We're looking for another thing is about lived experience around veterans and family members that may come from specific cohorts like, Aboriginal, multicultural and things like that. There's also, the scope to examine all relevant issues, basically probably a cover-all one, that is, Mark. And then we're asking, this came from veterans as well, about look at the past data and gather and collate reports on current data while the commission is running on suicide rates, because the data is, like, in the veterans, the data is, like, even knowing who's a veteran or an ex-service person is just, it's just not there. It's just really, really.
The research is not there.
Yeah, and it needs to be modernised. And also the commission needs to report findings of neglect, willful damage, neglect or criminality to relevant authorities for investigation, and act on the outcomes of these investigations. So I think you've heard that as a common theme too, Mark. So getting back to this, I'm signing this letter, but this letter belongs to the really, fantastic, courageous, so impressive Victorian veterans and their families that have, been prepared to assist me in the best response I think I can give. So I'm planning on I'm just finishing tidying up. I know the deadline's today. I will send this letter soon to Darren Chester and other emails. And then later next week, I'll make sure it goes out publicly so everyone can read it. And so getting back to, it's been a humbling process for me that people are prepared to, share their stories. And getting back to the welfare system, Mark. This is the best one I've come across, and I've been told it's not unique. And this is not like a real, like, this young vet I spoke to could laugh with me, because when he told me, I couldn't help myself but laugh. Getting back to the different number of acts.
Yep.
He was an Afghanistan vet, armoured vehicle operator. Unfortunately, his armoured vehicles were blown up 3 times while I was over there. So he's had some residual effects. He looks great. He's, like I said, great sense of humour. He's 36. He looks like he's 24. Looks great, but he told me the rehabilitation, and he's getting around well, but the rehabilitation of his right ankle comes under a different act to the rehabilitation of his left ankle. And I know I shouldn't laugh, and I did laugh, and I apologise. He goes, "No, it's funny, mate. It's funny. It's that absurd. You've got to laugh."
It is. It is absurd. Yeah.
So I think this is getting back to. I tell that story to people that have like me, that haven't been a veteran, haven't been, closely associated, with people in the forces or the time in the forces in the last 20 years, and you tell that story. A lot of people just like that's so powerful, because people, that's ridiculous.
It summarises it beautifully, the situation there, doesn't it?
It does. It's just like, and I'm glad he could have a laugh about it, but. And then in the same time, there was another guy there that, told me that, he was in a dark place and how he got out of it, and his feeling that, once again, the system was so hard that, he felt let down. I spoke to another Afghanistan veteran that told me that he has 3 claims that he believes he should put into the DVA, but he's not going to because he's concerned that it'll jam up the system for his friends.
Mm.
I mean, and how many out there are like that?
Well, yeah, and I mean, and the system from all accounts is jammed up, and the claims are taking a long time to get through and so forth. We haven't got the up-to-date data on that, but it's something we should look into.
Yeah, and there's, look, I think, I just, when I wrote to Minister Chester back last year, I still stand by, amalgamate the acts, create a system where you believe veterans and their families in the first instance when they reach out to help, probably save money.
As long as they don't use the opportunity to amalgamate the acts and water it all down. That's
I think take the best bits out, not the worst things. That's a good point.
That's what we worry about the most, obviously.
Yeah. But I think look, I think the last few years, people are talking about these things now when they didn't.
It's pretty hard to hide from it now. I think it's out in the public. We've got some really strong, personal advocates out there, such as Leane and people like that. She's not stepping away.
No.
And there's many others as well. They're plugging away, and we've got attention of ministers such as yourself, state-wise, and that sort of thing as well. So it's, I think the groundwork is there now to make some change.
Yeah, and I was actually really honoured. I got to meet Leane a couple of Saturdays ago, and I just told her I think she's a hero because, she's one person, but, sometimes one person could make a huge difference. So, I think it's a good thing. It's topical. We've got momentum. We need to keep pushing. Like if a few people's feelings get hurt along the way, well, so be it, because it's, different feelings get hurt than someone, like someone, like in a dark place, like I said, that we need to do everything we can to support that. So once again, it's just, it's just been a privilege to me to have these conversations. It's a whole new world which I'll never completely understand and never pretend to completely understand. But that's why it's good to speak to people like yourselves and others, and you're assisting me in the best advice I can give to the state government and others.
Well, Shaun, thank you so much for the update today. We've covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure our audience will be listening intently to some of the things that you've had to say. And I just want to thank you once more for coming on to our stream.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure, mate. Let's do it again.